The scream that tore from my throat wasn't human anymore. It started deep in my chest, a sound I'd never made before, reverberating through the Colorado wilderness like the cry of something ancient and terrible. When I finally stopped, the silence that followed felt heavier than the mountains themselves. My name is Dane Russell. I used to be an environmental lawyer from Denver, the kind of guy who spent weekends hiking these same trails, who believed in justice and making the world better through proper channels. That man died 3 days ago when I touched something that fell from the stars. The camping trip was supposed to be my escape. After 18 months fighting a losing battle against corporate polluters, I needed the solitude of Pike National Forest. Just me, my tent, and the kind of silence you can only find 30 miles from the nearest cell tower. I'd picked a spot near Willow Creek, where the aspen trees formed natural walls against the world. On the second night, I was feeding twigs to my campfire when the sky exploded. A streak of crimson light tore across the darkness, so bright it painted the trees in shades of blood. The light moved wrong, not like a meteor or falling satellite. It curved, twisted, almost like it was searching for something. The air itself seemed to hum, a frequency that made my teeth ache and my bones vibrate. The impact came from the north, maybe half a mile away. No thunderous crash, just a soft thud that somehow carried farther than any explosion should have. The forest went silent. Even the insects stopped their endless chatter. I should have stayed by the fire. Should have packed up and driven home. Instead, I grabbed my flashlight and followed the lingering scent of ozone and something else. Something metallic and sweet that reminded me of copper pennies and burnt almonds. The crater wasn't large, maybe 10 feet across and 3 deep. The earth around it had been fused into glass, creating a perfect bowl that reflected my flashlight beam in prismatic patterns. At the center, nestled in soil that still steamed despite the mountain cold, lay the crystal. It was no bigger than a walnut, but it commanded attention like a cathedral. The surface shifted between translucent and opaque, crimson light pulsing from its core in rhythm with something I realized, with growing unease, matched my heartbeat. Each pulse sent ripples of warmth through the air, and I could swear I heard whispers just beyond the edge of understanding. "Don't," I said aloud, my voice cracking in the stillness. "Whatever this is, Dane, just don't." But my feet were already carrying me down the crater's slope. The closer I got, the stronger the pull became. Not physical, but something deeper. Like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. Like finding the missing piece of a puzzle I didn't know I was solving. My hand extended without conscious thought. The moment my fingertips brushed the crystal's surface, the world exploded into red. Pain beyond description flooded every nerve. I felt my consciousness scatter like leaves in a hurricane, stretching across dimensions I couldn't name. For an instant that lasted eternity. I was everywhere and nowhere, experiencing the birth of stars and the death of galaxies. I saw Earth from impossible angles, witnessed civilizations rise and fall in the blink of an eye, felt the weight of cosmic forces pressing against my fragmented mind. Then darkness claimed me. I woke to wrongness. The sun was rising from the south, which made no sense until I realized I was lying facing the opposite direction from where I'd fallen. But that wasn't the strangest part. Around me, in perfect concentric circles, every object within 50 feet hovered motionless in midair. Rocks, leaves, pine cones, even drops of dew hung suspended like a 3-dimensional photograph. My camping gear from the distant campsite floated among them, my sleeping bag and coffee mug and phone caught in this impossible stillness. Only I remained on the ground, lying in the exact center of the phenomenon. I sat up slowly, afraid that sudden movement might shatter whatever had caused this. The crystal was gone, but I could feel it. Not in my pocket or nearby, but inside me, its presence warm and alien in my chest. When I focused on that sensation, the floating objects trembled. "What did you do to me?" I whispered. The answer came not in words, but in understanding that bloomed like a flower in my mind. Power. Raw, unlimited, cosmic power that made the forces I'd read about in physics textbooks seem like toys. I could feel gravity itself bending around me, waiting for direction. The electromagnetic spectrum lay open like a book I could rewrite at will. I reached out tentatively toward a hovering pine cone. Before my fingers came close, It drifted toward my palm with the gentle precision of a trained bird. When I gestured, it spun, flipped, danced through the air in patterns that should have been impossible. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Telekinesis. Not the parlor trick kind from movies, but something vast and terrible. I could sense the mountains around me, feel their weight and structure. If I wanted, I could crumble them like sand castles. The knowledge was there, complete and undeniable, downloaded directly into my brain by whatever alien intelligence had created the crystal. For 3 hours, I experimented. Small things first. Making leaves dance, stacking rocks without touching them, bending branches into impossible shapes. But with each success, the scope of my abilities became clearer. I could feel the tectonic plates beneath Colorado, sense the magnetic field that protected Earth from solar radiation. All of it was mine to command. The moral weight hit me as I floated back to my campsite, my feet never touching the ground. I had power that could end wars, stop natural disasters, reshape the world itself. The lawyer in me immediately began cataloging injustices I could correct, conflicts I could resolve, suffering I could prevent. That's when I made my first mistake. I thought I could be a hero. The drive back to Denver passed in a blur of planning. I'd researched enough international conflicts in my environmental work to know where to start. Syria was still burning, years after the world had grown tired of watching. Civilian casualties mounted daily while diplomats debated and politicians postured. Children died while adults argued about borders and oil rights. I could end it. End all of it. But I needed to be smart. Sudden appearances of flying men tend to cause panic. Instead, I booked a flight to Turkey, told my firm I was taking extended leave for family emergencies, and spent the plane ride studying satellite maps of Aleppo. The plan was simple. I would approach during a ceasefire, demonstrate my abilities to both sides, and demand they lay down their weapons. No more hiding behind uniforms or flags. Just a display of power so overwhelming that continued fighting would be obviously futile. I was still thinking like a lawyer, believing that reason and evidence could change minds. The first time I used my powers in combat, 3 men died. I'd found what looked like a straightforward situation from my hotel in Gaziantep. Government forces had a rebel position surrounded in a bombed-out school. Civilians, including children, were trapped inside. Through binoculars borrowed from a war correspondent, I watched the standoff develop into something ugly. I waited until dusk, then flew to the site. Flying felt natural now, as easy as walking. The crystal's power flowed through me like a second bloodstream, responding to my will with eager precision. I descended between the two forces, hovering 20 feet above the rubble-strewn courtyard. "Stop!" I shouted in Arabic, grateful for the language courses my firm had paid for. "I am here to end this." The shooting started immediately. Bullets passed through the space where I'd been hovering, but I was already moving, faster than thought. The crystal showed me trajectories, gave me perfect awareness of every projectile. I caught them all, dozens of rounds hanging frozen in the air around me like deadly rain. "Look at what I can do," I gestured, and the bullets crumpled into a perfect sphere of compressed metal. "Your weapons are useless. Stop fighting." What happened next still visits my nightmares. The government forces thought I was a rebel superweapon. The rebels assumed I was some kind of government experiment. Both sides turned their guns on me, coordinating fire for the first time in months. In their shared terror, enemies became allies. I panicked. The power surged out of me like a dam bursting. Every weapon within a quarter-mile radius crumpled simultaneously, crushed by invisible hands into metal origami. Vehicle engines seized. Radio equipment sparked and died. In my fear and anger, I destroyed everything electronic in the area, including the medical equipment keeping 3 critically wounded civilians alive in a nearby field hospital. I heard their heart monitors flatline as I fled, the sound carrying across the sudden silence like an accusation. 3 people who might have lived, dead, because I thought I could play God with forces I didn't understand. That night, hiding in an abandoned warehouse outside the city, I stared at my hands and tried to convince myself it had been an accident. Collateral damage in a noble cause. The kind of utilitarian calculus that lawyers and politicians use to justify difficult decisions. But I could still feel those crushed weapons, still sense the electromagnetic pulse that had fried every piece of technology for miles. I had done that, not in self-defense or by accident, but because I was afraid and angry and had power beyond imagination. The crystal pulsed warmly in my chest, like a satisfied cat. It didn't judge my actions. It simply waited, ready to grant whatever I desired. As I prepared to fly home, one thought echoed in my mind with terrifying clarity. If I couldn't handle one small conflict, how could I possibly save the world? But I was going to try anyway, because the alternative was accepting that I was just a man with godlike power and no idea how to use it responsibly. And that, I was beginning to realize, might be the most dangerous thing of all. 6 months after Syria, I stopped pretending I was still human. The change hadn't happened overnight. It was gradual, like watching paint dry or ice melt. One day, I was Dane Russell, environmental lawyer with a guilty conscience and impossible powers. The next, I was something else entirely. Something that watched the world burn from 30,000 feet and calculated the mathematics of intervention. The UN building in New York looked like a child's toy from my position above the clouds. Through the crystal's enhanced senses, I could perceive every conversation happening inside, feel the heat signatures of 200 delegates arguing about the crisis in Somalia. They'd been talking for 6 weeks while people starved. Children turned into skeletons wrapped in skin, while diplomats debated grain distribution protocols. I'd tried working through channels after Syria, contacted government officials, submitted to interviews with intelligence agencies, even met with the Secretary General himself. They'd all smiled, nodded, and done exactly nothing. The machine of bureaucracy ground forward at its own pace, indifferent to the suffering it was meant to address. So I stopped asking permission. The first warlord's compound outside Mogadishu crumbled like a house of cards when I gestured from a mile away. Concrete walls became powder. Steel beams twisted into abstract sculptures. I made sure the building was empty first. I wasn't a monster, not yet. But the message was clear. Stop hoarding food aid, or face consequences that no army could protect against. It worked, for exactly 3 days. Then the other factions decided I was working for their enemies. Violence escalated as each group tried to prove they couldn't be intimidated by mysterious flying men. The death toll doubled within a week. "You're making it worse," said Anna Lay, the aid coordinator I'd been working with through encrypted communications. "We met in a refugee camp outside Baidoa, the kind of place that exists in the spaces between wars. Every time you intervene, they get more desperate, more violent." I floated 6 inches off the ground while we talked, having given up on maintaining human pretenses around the few people who knew what I was. The displaced families around us had learned to ignore my presence, too focused on survival to waste energy on fear. "They're starving," I said, gesturing toward a group of children so thin their eyes looked too large for their skulls. "While men with guns sit on warehouses full of grain. How is ending that making things worse?" Anna's laugh held no humor. "Because you're not ending it. You're just changing who has the guns. Yesterday's victim becomes tomorrow's oppressor, and the cycle continues. Then I'll stop them all. And who decides what counts as oppression? You?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You've been up there too long, Dane. You're starting to think like them." "Like who?" "Like gods. Like you're the only one who can see the big picture." I wanted to argue, but the words died in my throat. Because she was right, in a way that made my chest burn with more than just the crystal's warmth. I had started thinking in terms of acceptable losses and necessary interventions. When you could reshape mountains, human lives began to feel like statistics. The realization should have stopped me, should have sent me back to my cabin in Colorado to live quietly with my impossible burden. Instead, it made me more determined. If I was becoming something inhuman, maybe that's what the world needed. Someone who could make the hard choices that elected officials and diplomats couldn't. The first time I killed someone, it was almost an accident. 3 months later, I was hovering over an arms dealer's mansion in Montenegro when the man himself stepped onto his balcony. Viktor Kozlov, responsible for funneling weapons to half the conflicts on Earth. I'd planned to destroy his stockpiles, bankrupt his operation through targeted infrastructure damage. Clean, precise, no casualties. But when I saw him standing there, champagne glass in hand, laughing into his phone about delivery schedules to Myanmar, something snapped. The crystal's power flowed through me like molten metal. Kozlov's champagne glass exploded in his hand, the liquid becoming a blade of frozen ice that opened his throat before he could scream. He died choking on his own blood while I watched from the sky, feeling nothing but satisfaction. That night, I researched every arms dealer, weapons manufacturer, and military contractor I could find. Within a week, 17 of them were dead. Heart attacks, aneurysms, accidents that looked natural but weren't. The crystal showed me how to stop hearts, rupture blood vessels, trigger cellular failures that left no evidence. The weapons trade didn't slow down. New dealers emerged within days, eager to fill the vacuum. But for the first time since gaining my powers, I felt like I was making progress. Direct action, immediate results. The second killing was easier. A human trafficker in Bangkok who specialized in children. I crushed his skull from 3 miles away while he slept. A quick compression that the coroner would attribute to a brain hemorrhage. The third was easier still. By the time I'd eliminated my 100th target, the international community had given me a name: the Arbitrator. Military satellites tracked my movements, though they couldn't do anything to stop me. Intelligence agencies built profiles trying to predict my next target. The UN held emergency sessions discussing how to respond to a rogue superweapon with apparent moral constraints. Moral constraints. The phrase would have been funny if it wasn't so tragically accurate. I still had rules, boundaries I wouldn't cross. No civilians, no collateral damage when possible. Focus on those who directly caused suffering rather than their subordinates. I told myself these limitations proved I hadn't lost my humanity, that I was still the man who'd become a lawyer to help people. The truth was darker. I was becoming a judge and executioner who answered to no law but his own interpretation of justice. The breaking point came in the Democratic Republic of Congo. A mining corporation was using child labor to extract rare earth elements, the same materials that powered the phones and computers the world depended on. Local officials had been bought off. International oversight was non-existent, and children as young as 7 were dying in collapsed tunnels. I started small. Destroyed the mining equipment, collapsed the tunnel entrances, made the operation financially impossible to continue. The company pulled out within a month, exactly as I'd hoped. 2 weeks later, they were back with private military contractors. The mercenaries wore no flags, carried weapons that weren't supposed to exist, and had orders to secure the mining site by any means necessary. When local families protested, they opened fire. I arrived during the massacre. 43 civilians lay dead in the red dirt, including children I'd thought I was protecting. The mercenaries were loading their equipment, preparing to resume operations as if nothing had happened. Their commander, a former Navy SEAL named James Crawford, was giving orders to burn the bodies and bury the evidence. That's when I learned what rage could do when combined with godlike power. I didn't kill Crawford immediately. Instead, I lifted him into the air, slowly, letting him understand what was happening. His men opened fire, their bullets freezing inches from my skin before dropping harmlessly to the ground. "You killed children," I said, my voice carrying across the mining site like thunder. Crawford's training kicked in. Even suspended helplessly in midair, he tried to negotiate. We were following orders, corporate security. You want to blame someone, blame the people who signed the contracts. I will, after I'm done with you. I reached into his mind, something the crystal had shown me how to do months earlier, and found every detail of the operation. Every order given, every weapon supplied, every payment made. The entire network of corruption and violence that had led to this moment. Then, I showed him what justice looked like to a god. Crawford died screaming, his body crushed slowly from the inside out while his nervous system remained perfectly intact. I made sure he felt everything. The other mercenaries tried to run, but there's nowhere to hide from someone who can sense your heartbeat from orbit. I killed them all. Every single one. But I didn't stop there. Using the information I'd ripped from Crawford's mind, I traced the operation back to its source. The mining company's board of directors died in their sleep, their hearts simply stopping in the middle of the night. The government officials who'd taken bribes suffered sudden strokes. The arms dealers who'd supplied the weapons choked on their own blood. Within 72 hours, I'd eliminated 67 people across 4 continents. The world took notice. The Arbitrator Massacre, the media called it. Footage from security cameras showed bodies dropping without visible cause, boardroom meetings ending in simultaneous heart attacks, military compounds collapsing under invisible forces. For the first time, people began to understand the scope of what I could do. Fear, I realized, was more effective than diplomacy. Countries started offering tribute. Arms manufacturers shut down voluntarily rather than risk my attention. Warlords abandoned their territories and fled to safe houses that wouldn't protect them if I decided they deserved death. The mere possibility of my intervention began reshaping global politics. I established rules, demands that were really ultimatums delivered through hijacked television broadcasts and satellite networks. End human trafficking. Stop using child soldiers. Cease weapons sales to conflict zones. The deadline was always the same: 30 days. Most complied. Those who didn't joined the growing list of people whose deaths looked natural, but weren't. The crystal pulsed stronger with each life I took, as if feeding on the violence. Sometimes I caught myself stroking the warm spot in my chest where it rested, the way a smoker might unconsciously reach for cigarettes. The power was addictive, and I was consuming larger doses with each intervention. That's when I noticed the first signs of resistance. Military satellites began tracking me more aggressively. New weapon systems came online. Electromagnetic pulse devices, directed energy weapons, particle beam arrays. Nothing that could hurt me, but the intent was clear. The world's governments were trying to develop countermeasures. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Anna Lay. I hadn't spoken to her since Somalia, but I still monitored her communications out of old affection. The encrypted message she sent to the International Criminal Court was only 3 words long. He's losing himself. Attached was a psychological profile she'd been developing, a detailed analysis of my behavioral patterns and decision-making processes. She'd been studying me like a virus, tracking my evolution from reluctant hero to something much darker. Her conclusion was terrifying in its accuracy. I had become exactly the kind of threat I'd originally set out to stop. A force beyond legal accountability, imposing my will through violence and fear, convinced of my own righteousness while bodies piled up in my wake. The worst part was that I didn't care. Reading her assessment felt like looking in a funhouse mirror, distorted but recognizable. Yes, I'd killed hundreds of people. Yes, I'd appointed myself judge and executioner for the entire human race. But the results spoke for themselves. Armed conflicts were down 60% globally. Human trafficking had dropped to historic lows. Children weren't dying in cobalt mines or being forced to carry AK-47s. Sometimes I thought while deleting Anna's files from every server she'd touched, the world needs a monster to keep the other monsters in check. That night, floating in the stratosphere above the Pacific Ocean, I made a decision that would have horrified the man I'd been 18 months earlier. I stopped pretending my actions were about justice or protection or any noble ideal. I admitted finally that I enjoyed the power. The crystal pulsed in response to my honesty, sending waves of warm satisfaction through my nervous system. For the first time since touching it, I felt truly connected to the alien intelligence that had created it. We understood each other now. We both knew what power was really for. The revelation should have been liberating, but it came with an unexpected side effect: loneliness. Being the sole arbiter of human behavior was isolating in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had no peers, no one to discuss my decisions with, no one who could understand the weight of holding an entire species' fate in my hands. The few people who knew what I was either feared me or wanted to study me like a laboratory specimen. I began spending more time away from Earth, floating in the vacuum between the planet and the moon, watching the slow rotation of my domain. From that distance, human civilization looked fragile and temporary, like a soap bubble floating on the edge of cosmic indifference. It was during one of these meditative flights that I detected the signal. At first, I thought it was interference from a satellite, a high-frequency pulse that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, just beyond the edge of perception. But as I focused the crystal's enhanced senses, the pattern became clear. It wasn't random. It was a message. The signal was searching for something, scanning every electromagnetic frequency, probing radio waves and cosmic background radiation with the methodical precision of advanced technology. Whatever was sending it had capabilities that made human space programs look like children playing with fireworks. And it was looking for the crystal. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The source of my power hadn't been some random cosmic accident. It belonged to someone, something, that was now searching for its missing property. I should have been terrified. Should have prepared for the possibility that the crystal's original owners might want it back. Instead, I felt only defiance. The power was mine now. I'd paid for it with my humanity, my relationships, my peace of mind. Whatever had created the crystal could find another way to reshape the universe. I had work to finish here. The signal grew stronger over the next month, shifting from a whisper to a shout that reverberated through dimensions I couldn't name. Each pulse sent tremors through the crystal, like a tuning fork responding to a matching frequency. My powers fluctuated with each transmission, sometimes weaker, sometimes stronger, as if the crystal was being remotely tested. Then, on a Tuesday morning while I was solving a dispute between India and Pakistan by threatening to redirect the Ganges River, the signal stopped. The silence was more terrifying than any noise had been. For 3 days, I waited, monitoring radio telescopes, watching satellite feeds, scanning the skies with senses that could detect a paperclip from orbit. Nothing. Just the usual background noise of human civilization going about its business, unaware that their self-appointed guardian was experiencing his first real moment of fear in over a year. The ship appeared on the 4th day. It materialized without warning in the space between Earth and the Moon, a structure so vast that it blocked out stars. No sleek curves or aerodynamic designs. This was architecture on a cosmic scale. All angles and impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. The crystal in my chest went cold for the first time since I'd touched it, like a child hiding from an angry parent. A communication beam locked onto my position immediately, carrying a voice that spoke in harmonics no human throat could produce. "Return what you have stolen." I floated in the vacuum, Earth hanging like a blue marble beneath my feet, and realized that my war with humanity was about to become something much larger. The real test of my power was about to begin. The first thing you learn about confronting cosmic beings is that terror has a taste. It sits bitter on your tongue, metallic and sharp, like blood mixed with ozone. I'd grown accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room, on any continent, on any world. Now, suspended in the vacuum between Earth and Moon, I felt like a child holding a toy sword against a hurricane. The alien ship, if ship was even the right word for something that existed in dimensions my human brain couldn't fully process, had been watching me for 3 days, waiting. The communication beam remained locked onto my position, but no further messages had come. Just that terrible, patient silence that spoke louder than any threat. During those 3 days, I tried to maintain my routine. Stopped a corporate massacre in Guatemala by liquefying the executives' spines from inside their bodies. Prevented a nuclear exchange between 2 Middle Eastern powers by redirecting their missiles into the sun. Eliminated a network of organ traffickers across 7 countries with precisely timed aneurysms. But my heart wasn't in the work anymore. Each death felt hollow, mechanical. The crystal's warmth had turned cold against my chest, and with it, the euphoric rush of absolute power had faded to a dull ache. Like withdrawal from a drug I hadn't realized I was addicted to. On the 4th day, they finally spoke. "You have ignored our warning," the voice said, arriving not through my ears but directly into my consciousness. It felt like having my thoughts rearranged by surgical instruments. "Return what you have stolen, or face the consequences of your theft." I floated in the darkness between worlds, Earth's blue glow warming my back while the impossible geometry of the alien vessel filled my vision. Part of me, the part that still remembered being Dane Russell, environmental lawyer from Denver, wanted to apologize, to explain that it had been an accident, that I'd never meant to steal anything, that I'd just been curious about a pretty rock in the woods. But that man was dead. Had been dead for months, killed by power and isolation, and the gradual erosion of everything that had once made him human. "I don't answer to you," I said, letting my voice carry across the vacuum through electromagnetic manipulation. "This is my world now. My responsibility. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to try and take it from me." The response came not in words, but in demonstration. Reality shifted. One moment I was floating in space, master of forces that could reshape continents. The next, I was standing in my childhood bedroom in Boulder, Colorado. 8 years old again, clutching a stuffed dinosaur, while my parents argued downstairs about money and divorce, and all the adult problems that had seemed impossibly large at the time. "We know you," the voice said, now coming from everywhere and nowhere. "We have seen your pattern across 1,000 worlds, Dane Russell. The idealist who gains power beyond measure. The savior who becomes destroyer. The child who finds a gun and thinks himself a god." The bedroom dissolved. Now I stood in my law school classroom, 25 and full of righteous anger about environmental destruction. Professor Martinez was explaining tort law while I sketched plans to save the world through litigation and proper procedure. "You think yourself unique," the voice continued, "but you are a type, a category, a recurring phenomenon that we have observed and cataloged across the breadth of the galaxy." The scene shifted again. The Syrian battlefield where I'd first killed. The floating objects around my campsite. The mining compound in Congo where I'd learned what rage could accomplish. Each moment was perfect in its detail, down to the smell of cordite and the weight of guilt in my chest. "We create the crystals as tests," the voice explained while I watched myself crush James Crawford's ribcage with a thought. "Not weapons, but measurements. Tools to identify those capable of growth and those destined for destruction. You, Dane Russell, have failed spectacularly." "Failed?" I laughed, the sound echoing strangely in the space between memories. "I've ended more wars in 18 months than your species has probably seen in its entire existence. I've eliminated poverty, stopped genocides, created peace through strength. How exactly is that failure?" The illusions vanished. I was back in space, but something had changed. The crystal in my chest wasn't just cold now. It was pulling, tugging like a fishhook embedded in my sternum. The alien ship's gravitational field was calling it home. "Peace through fear is not peace," the voice said. "It is merely delayed violence. Order imposed by terror is not order. It is compression that will eventually explode. You have not solved humanity's problems, Dane Russell. You have merely postponed them, while adding your own darkness to the equation." I fought against the pull, channeling every ounce of power the crystal had given me. Around us, space itself began to warp. Solar wind became visible as streams of golden light. Asteroid fragments drifted between Earth and Moon, caught in the gravitational disturbance. The International Space Station's orbit decayed by several kilometers before I managed to stabilize it with a thought. "You want to talk about darkness?" I snarled, my form beginning to blur as competing forces tore at the fabric of reality. "I've seen what humanity does when left to its own devices. Genocide, slavery, children forced to mine minerals so rich people can have smartphones. At least my darkness serves a purpose." "Then prove it," the voice said with finality. "Keep your stolen power, Dane Russell. But know that we will take it by force, if necessary." That's when the real battle began. The alien being materialized before me, stepping out of dimensions that folded space like origami. It was tall, perhaps 9 feet, with skin that shifted between states of matter. Sometimes solid, sometimes liquid, sometimes pure energy. Its face was a void filled with stars, ancient and terrible and utterly inhuman. "I gave you a choice," it said, raising what might have been a hand. "You have chosen poorly." Power met power in the vacuum between worlds. The alien's abilities were different from mine, older, more refined, working with the fundamental forces of reality instead of simply overwhelming them. Where I was a sledgehammer, it was a surgeon's scalpel. But I was desperate, and desperation gave me an edge it hadn't calculated. I struck first, hurling Jupiter's moon Europa at the alien ship with enough force to crack continents. The being caught it casually, transmuting its mass into pure energy that dispersed harmlessly into the cosmic background radiation. "Crude," it observed, then gestured toward Earth. Every volcano on the planet erupted simultaneously. The Pacific Ring of Fire awakened with the fury of a dying god. Mount Vesuvius, Yellowstone, Mount Fuji, Krakatoa. They all exploded at once, filling the atmosphere with ash and molten rock. From space, I could see the red glow spreading across continents as lava flows carved new rivers through major cities. "Stop!" I screamed, abandoning our battle to throw every ounce of my power toward Earth. I tried to cap the volcanoes, to redirect the lava, to clear the choking ash from the atmosphere. But for every disaster I prevented, 2 more erupted. "This is what your defiance costs," the alien said calmly, while I worked frantically to save as many lives as possible. "Every second you refuse to return what you have stolen, more of your precious humans die." I couldn't fight it and save Earth simultaneously. The choice was deliberately cruel: maintain my godhood or protect the people I'd claimed to serve. But the choice was also revealing. Because in that moment, faced with losing either my power or watching millions burn, I hesitated. For 3 crucial seconds, I hesitated. 3 seconds where I weighed my own importance against human lives. 3 seconds where the crystal's influence whispered that I could always rebuild, that a reduced population might be easier to manage, that sometimes sacrifices were necessary for the greater good. 3 seconds that damned me more completely than any of my previous murders. By the time I chose to help Earth, it was too late. The Yellowstone supervolcano had fully awakened, blanketing North America in volcanic winter. The Indonesian archipelago was disappearing beneath tsunamis triggered by underwater eruptions. Half of Japan was on fire. "You hesitated," the alien observed with something that might have been disappointment. "Even now, faced with genocide, you prioritize your own power over their lives. This is why you have failed our test." Rage consumed me then. Not the cold, calculated anger I'd grown accustomed to, but something primal and destructive. The crystal responded to my fury, amplifying it beyond any rational limit. I became a force of nature myself, tearing through space toward my tormentor with the fury of a dying star. The battle that followed reshaped the solar system. I hurled asteroids like bullets, redirected comets as weapons, tried to collapse the sun itself into a weapon against my enemy. The alien being met each attack with surgical precision, turning my own power against me, forcing me to choose between offense and protecting what remained of Earth. Every exchange cost human lives. When I shattered Mercury to use as projectiles, the debris fell toward Earth as a meteor shower that burned away what remained of the atmosphere. When I tried to weaponize solar flares, the radiation sterilized entire continents. The alien being wasn't trying to destroy Earth. I was doing that myself, in my desperation to win a battle I couldn't possibly survive. "This is what power without wisdom accomplishes," it said while I watched Australia disappear beneath a wall of molten rock. "You claim to protect them, but your very existence threatens their survival." I knew it was right. Every moment I continued fighting was another nail in humanity's coffin, but I couldn't stop. The crystal had become part of me, and losing it felt like losing my soul. Without it, I would be just another victim of the catastrophe I'd helped create. The end came suddenly. The alien being stopped defending itself and simply absorbed my next attack. The energy I'd poured into destroying it flowed into its impossible anatomy, making it larger, brighter, more terrible. I felt the crystal respond, trying to pull away from me toward its true master. "No!" I screamed, clutching at my chest where the warmth had lived for 18 months. "It's mine. I earned it." "You stole it," the being corrected, "and theft always carries a price." The crystal tore free from my body with the sound of breaking glass. I felt my ribcage shatter as it emerged, my heart stopping as alien energy vacated the space where it had nested. Blood froze instantly in the vacuum, creating red crystals that drifted around us like a grotesque constellation. But the crystal didn't return to its master immediately. Instead, it hung between us, pulsing with malevolent light, as if deciding where to go next. The alien being reached for it, confident in its victory. That's when I made my final choice. With the last of my fading strength, I struck the crystal itself. Not to reclaim it, but to shatter it completely. If I couldn't have the power, no one could. Better to destroy it than let it corrupt another soul. The explosion that followed could be seen from Alpha Centauri. Space-time folded in on itself as energies beyond human comprehension were released all at once. The alien being screamed, a sound that existed in spectrums I hadn't known were possible. As fragments of its precious test scattered across dimensions, I was dying. My body was coming apart at the molecular level, torn by forces that should have reduced me to constituent atoms. But I was laughing, tasting my own blood as it boiled away in the vacuum, because I'd won something more important than any battle. I'd ensured that this particular evil would never poison another mind. The alien being gathered what fragments it could, its form already beginning to fade as whatever technology had brought it here struggled to maintain coherence in the aftermath of the explosion. "You understand nothing," it said, its voice now weak and distant. "The crystal was not destroyed, merely scattered. The pieces will find new hosts, and the cycle will begin again. You have solved nothing, Dane Russell. You have only delayed the inevitable." With that, it vanished, folding space around itself and disappearing back to whatever cosmic realm it called home. Alone, dying, I watched Earth turn beneath me and tried to calculate how much damage my defiance had cost. Half the planet was burning. The other half was freezing under volcanic ash that would take years to clear. Billions were dead or dying, their civilizations reduced to rubble by a war between gods they'd never asked for. I'd become everything I'd originally sworn to fight against. A force of destruction, masquerading as salvation. A monster convinced of its own righteousness. As my consciousness faded, I felt myself falling toward Earth. Not as a god returning to his domain, but as debris from a cosmic accident. My body broke apart in the atmosphere, most of it burning away in streaks of light that might have been beautiful if they weren't the death of the world's self-appointed savior. But one piece of me survived the fall. A fragment of crystalline energy, no larger than a grain of sand, that had somehow bonded with my dying cells during the explosion. It tumbled through the acid rain and choking ash, falling toward a continent that had once been called North America. The fragment landed in what had been the Colorado River, now swollen with runoff from the volcanic devastation. It sank through murky water, past the bodies of fish killed by changes in water chemistry, down to the riverbed where sediment had begun to bury the evidence of humanity's brief moment of cosmic significance. There it lay, dormant but not dead, waiting in the mud and silt for the world to heal, for new civilizations to rise from the ashes of the old, waiting for another curious soul to find it and repeat the cycle of good intentions and terrible consequences. The Earth would recover, eventually. Life always found a way. New species would evolve. New societies would develop. New dreamers would imagine they could save the world if only they had the power to act decisively. And someday, when the memory of Dane Russell and his war had faded to myth, someone would find a strange red crystal in an ancient riverbed. They would touch it, thinking themselves clever and curious, never imagining they were about to become the next chapter in a story written in blood and fire across the galaxy. The crystal pulsed once in the cold depths of the river, then went dark. Patient as stone, hungry as the void between stars. Waiting. Always waiting. For the next idealist who thought they could save the world. Above, in the poisoned sky, the first faint stars began to shine through the ash clouds. They looked down on a broken world that would spend the next 1,000 years learning to forgive its fallen god, never knowing that his greatest sin hadn't been the destruction he'd caused. It had been believing, until the very end, that he was the hero of his own story. The river flowed on, carrying secrets and sorrows toward an ocean that had forgotten the taste of clean water. And in its depths, something ancient and terrible dreamed of the next time someone would mistake power for wisdom, authority for righteousness, fear for respect. The cycle would begin again. It always did.